Hi, all. We're back talking about mosque architecture, and we're moving along in time a little bit and to focus on two empires. The first, the Safavid, and it is indicated here in the orange. And the main city of the Safavid Empire would be Isfahan, which is in today, what is Iran. And I'm showing you an aerial of, well, really kind of a satellite image of the center of Isfahan, which is really where we're going to focus. And here we are looking at it on the ground. So it is, by any definition, the center of this bustling city. And is you can see here, it has green space, it has fountains. So on one level, it looks very much like a civic park. On another, it has markets nearby, and it is also these covered walkways that line the civic park are places of offices and places of instruction, spaces dedicated to instruction. And obviously, what we're interested in is the thing right in front of us that is kind of popping out with its beautiful um, tile work, and that is the mosque. So now we are looking at the great mosque of Isfahan. And last time we were talking about Hippo style plan mosque in Cordoba, the Great Mosque in Cordoba. This time, the plan is a 4 plan, and Iwan is another word for gateway. It's an Arabic word for gateway. So back here, so the courtyard, so let's step back for a minute. What do mosques need? They need a courtyard. Well, the courtyard is here in the center, and on each of its four sides is a gateway. In this courtyard, there would have been a water source. And then you need minarets, which one of the gateways has the minarets, as you see here. And that particular gateway is the one that kind of guides the faithful to the prayer hall. And then each gateway itself is a kind of nod to an earlier empire, which I believe I mentioned in the last video, the Sasanian Empire. So what we're seeing for the first time are very, very large archways that are also rather pointed. So each of these four gateways or Iwans has a pointed opening, as you see here. And as you may notice, again, the gateway leading to the prayer hall is the gateway that is most ornate with blue tile and has two minarets and beyond it a dome. Okay, so here it is again. And this gateway is elaborated both by this beautiful blue tile work, but also by the fact that the arches themselves have been made even more complex. So you'll notice here that it's not simply that pointed arch, but it gives way to spaces that appear scooped out. And these scooped out spaces are known as muqarnas, Muqarnas. Sorry, meant to label them here. Anyway, the muqarnas are both a kind of way of making even more complex the archway. The muqarnas themselves almost maybe bring to mind a beehive or insect's nest, and that's because at the kind of basis of those scooped out areas of the arch is geometry again. And so now looking at some of the details of the tile work, speaking of geometry, we're seeing up close and personal the use of the arabesques. And remember, arabesques are the floral and vine and foliate motifs that we see. the overriding structure of geometry, especially in the detail on the right. Very, very clear. I don't think well, let me check. Actually, there is calligraphy in the in the four kind of copper colored motifs there. They embedded in them. I had to look up very closely. There is calligraphy. But in any case, a word about the geometry here. I mentioned in the last video, and I'm just bringing back with actual kind of visuals to back me up. The fact is the level of complexity here in the tile work is a way of expressing on the part of Muslim believers the complexity of God's creation. So you'll no doubt notice, and we'll talk more about this next week, but the ornamentation of these sacred spaces of Islam does not rely upon the human form, does not rely upon animal forms. In fact, what replaces narrative, as we've seen in Christian and Byzantine spaces, what's replacing that is a new visual language that doesn't talk about God as narrative, but talks about God as a series of complex patterns. And the interesting thing about these complex patterns is that they can be actually replicated in computers and have a great deal to do with fractals, which are those shapes or curves that can be repeated infinitely. And that notion of the infinite is really at the core of this tile ornament. In other words, like the kind of way one could get lost in these patterns, so too would a Muslim say, you cannot know God. There is something far more complex that our brains cannot wrap themselves around. And that complexity is God. And the closest we can get to that complexity are these elaborate patterns in tile work that truly play over all surfaces within a mosque. And we will see next week plays out on all surfaces of objects. And so this notion of a kind of almost infinite patterning is meant to reference kind of the infinite kind of mind of God, or the complexity of nature. And indeed, fractals can be seen in nature, for example, in the structures of snowflakes. So I want us to move through time a little bit and talk about what happens as the expression of Islam as empire plays out in the Ottoman Empire. So we go back to the Hagia Sophia, and you remember it was Christian structure built under the rule of Emperor Justinian. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks, who are Muslims, invade Constantinople. Oh, I left my L out. And essentially at that point, lay the groundwork for the capital now of the Ottoman Empire, and in doing so, change its name, because why would you want to make your capital the city of Constantine? Change that name and call it Istanbul. So, in doing that, Hagia Sophia will now become a mosque, which explains why that Byzantine church, in fact, has minarets on the outside of it. So those minarets, later addition, in 1453, you might recall when we were talking about the Hagia Sophia last week, there were large medallions hanging from the ceiling. They actually have Arabic on them. They actually are calligraphy phrases of Muslim belief done in these large medallions in calligraphy. So essentially, what happens is the Ottoman Turks come into Constantinople, call it Istanbul, look around, see this Christian church, blown away. Remember, Islam does not have a kind of homegrown architectural uh, language. It adapts to wherever it is. And in this case, what we're looking at is a new power structure, looking at a Christian church going, well, it's not going to work for us to keep it a Christian church, but I know what we'll do. We'll just make it a mosque. And then from then on, it became the shape of mosques. So I'm now showing you from the ground up, built as a mosque, the Mosque of Sultan Selim, or the Mosque of Selim in Edirne, Turkey. And sure enough, it really kind of looks just like the Hagia Sophia. And as such, it's a central plan mosque. So if you're keeping count, the Great Mosque of Cordoba, Hippo-style hall plan. Our Great Mosque at Isfahan is a 4E1 plan mosque. And now we're here at a central plan mosque. And so the Mosque of Selim, or Sultan Selim itself, would have been surrounded by a courtyard. Clearly has minarets, for extremely large, kind of attenuated towers. And remember, the minaret is from the minaret, the call to prayer 5 times a day. That's where it takes place. And of course, it's dominated by a dome, just as its model, the Hagia Sophia, was dominated by a dome. Both domes have windows in their bases. So when we go into the Mosque of Sultan Selim, we see a vast space, not surprising, designed for prayer. And in contrast to what we saw, for example, in the Great Mosque at Cordoba, here we do not have that forest of columns with piggyback arches, and things look kind of dizzying and almost confusing, and all of that complexity. No, now we just have an enormous space that is topped off by a dome. And here she is. And this dome, again, windows at the base, just like the dome of the Hagia Sophia. The dome here bears all of those earmarks of Islamic visual language. So in the center is calligraphy done up in, again, the language being Arabic. No doubt an excerpt from the Holy Book of Islam, the Quran. So white Arabic lettering on that blue background. In this image, we see, best as we can, details of flowers and vines, and we call those arabesques. And then, of course, geometry dominates the entire organization. The other kind of interesting thing, I think, is a little shout out to the Great Mosque of Cordoba in that alternating bands of material in the arches that support that dome. So when we look then, comparing a dome with a Byzantine dome, and that's what we're looking at here at the right. And no, we did not look at this specific dome in our examination last week, but I just wanted to bring it in as a very clear contrast between imaging the divine in Islam on the left, imaging the divine in Christianity on the right, where you get a literal representation of Jesus Christ on the right as all-powerful. And this is a very specific kind of image of Christ known as Christ Pantocrator, meaning ruler of all things. And he's, this enormous image kind of looming over you. And you do not at any moment forget that Christ was man. He's got, human features. He's got a beard, hands, the whole thing. But the scale and that halo and it reminds you, oh yeah, he was also the Son of God. In contrast, the dome from the Mosque of Sultan Selim on the left, where God to the Muslim believer is not man, at no point took the form of man, because remember, in Islam, Christ is a prophet, the last of the great prophets. God is something else again. God is a kind of abstract idea done, realized in the Word of God, calligraphy, in the references to nature, in the arabesques, and ultimately in geometry, a structure that underlies all of creation. All right, so that's it for now, folks. We'll be doing this again soon. Bye.